Black History Decoded.
In Thuringia, Germany, he proclaimed himself king of Thuringia. Sound familiar? Him and his followers appointed him king. Not only that, he was executed in 1368 by a Pontius Pilate-type figure named Walter Kurlinger, a 14th-century inquisitor. After his death, do you know what his followers believed? Go on, guess. Religious hypocrisy.
We all know that a woman cannot spontaneously have a child. That is ridiculous. Or we also know that a person cannot rise from the dead, especially after 3 days. That is absurd.
I am going to explain to you how so-called Jesus is none other than a 14th-century individual that has been pushed back in time and reimagined but still has some ties to what we are taught about the Jesus story and tie-ins to the Black Madonna and Child story. The Black Madonna and Child are a huge part of Catholic, European and world history coming from Africa that constantly gets ignored in the historical narrative. The reason for this is because if we focus on the Black Madonna and Child, their origin, history in Europe, around the world and from Africa, people will have a lot of questions about Christianity's true origins because their story is different from the white version, but my main focus in this video is to talk about the person who Jesus is patterned off of. It just so happens that the Black Madonna and Child are included in the story. This individual's name is Konrad Schmid, a German flagellant leader from the 1360s, which is fascinating because the Protestant Reformation came from Germany, which created a massive religious upheaval in Europe, and the most popular Bible in the world for over 400 years is the King James Bible, a Protestant Bible. English and modern German both descend from the same grandparent language, Proto-Germanic. Konrad Schmid was a self-proclaimed leader of the flagellant movement in Thuringia, Germany. The flagellants were very antagonistic towards the Jews, and Konrad Schmid was the self-proclaimed leader of the flagellant.
For the flagellants, it is an easy leap from criticizing the church to attacking the Jews. For to medieval Christians, no one offends God more.
There is a whole history of blood libels against the Jews, a whole history of persecution of the Jews by Christians during the Middle Ages.
And in Jewish communities, many thousands were indiscriminately butchered, slaughtered, and burnt alive by the Christians.
So when Konrad was eventually put on trial and burned at the stake, the Jews were very happy. That is why they say Jesus is in hell boiling in his own excrement.
On St. Valentine's Day, 1349, the citizens of Strasbourg round up as many as 2,000 Jews and burn them at the stake. The atrocity is repeated in more than 15 cities in Germany and Switzerland.
The hypocrisy of the flagellants was overwhelming. The flagellants loved sacrificing their flesh and blood for the sins of the people. Sound familiar? The iconography of Jesus nailed, bloody, battered and bruised on the cross are the hallmarks of the flagellants because they loved body mortification.
In his journals, the French chronicler Jean Divanet writes,
The penitents scourged themselves with whips of hard-knotted leather with little iron spikes. Some made themselves bleed very badly between the shoulder blades, and some foolish women had clothes ready to catch the blood and smear it on their eyes, saying it was miraculous blood.
They believed they had to punish their own bodies so severely so God would accept their suffering as payment for their sins or the sins of the people. They were so popular during the Bubonic Plague because of their self-sacrifice for the people.
Theirs is an extreme measure for an extreme time, and people flock to them in droves.
People looked upon the flagellants as helping to ward off the disease, as perhaps their extraordinary penance might avert God's wrath.
Because of this, in their minds, the flagellants were the most devoted Christians on earth. Remember that, in their mind the flagellants were the most devoted Christians on earth for sacrificing their flesh and blood for the sins of the people. The hysteria during the Bubonic Plague was so great that people thought their blood was holy, but wasn't only Jesus' blood holy?
Some made themselves bleed very badly between the shoulder blades, and some foolish women had clothes ready to catch the blood and smear it on their eyes, saying it was miraculous blood.
Shouldn't the flagellants and the people know all about Jesus at that time? Well, apparently they didn't based on their actions.
Believing their bloody sacrifice earns them God's grace, flagellants claim to perform Christ-like miracles.
Some flagellants believed that dead babies or dead children could be revived in their midst. There's also a famous story of a cow talking as a miracle ascribed to the flagellants.
Konrad Schmid was not just a religious leader, he was believed by his followers to be the fulfillment of a popular medieval prophecy about the emperor of the last days. This prophecy, often associated with figures like Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, foretold a final, eschatological emperor who would restore the world to a state of peace and righteousness. There is a massive deception on this planet. So-called Jesus did not exist when we were told he existed. In a later video I am going to go into depth about this famous medieval prophecy that doesn't talk about so-called Jesus at all, which is weird, but has all the signs of resurrection and bringing about peace through war. The flagellants were against the church and they refused to submit to the church's authority, laws, or moral commands. Catholicism and Christianity were not the same back then. Now bear in mind that Christianity was not powerful at all until the Bubonic Plague. The Bubonic Plague severely weakened the Catholic Church, allowing these upstarts to rise up, and Christians never looked back since. Even though their rise to power was off of a disastrous apocalyptic plague, and during that plague they took advantage of the ineffectiveness of the Catholic Church and then blaming the Jews for the plague, causing even more problems. Effectively committing a mass execution of Jews all throughout Europe based on a lie.
What's poisoning us is the Jews' presence itself. That the Jews' presence is a moral failing. It's our sin to tolerate them, and this is what's bringing this punishment.
As Pope Clement VI pointed out at the time, Jews were dying in equal number to Christians, so it was fantastical to argue that Jews were poisoning people during the Black Death.
The Pope's pleas fall on deaf ears.
Hence the Jewish attitude towards Christians and their leader, so-called Jesus. After that barbarism, we know Christians started going around the world and eluding people that didn't fit their code. All the while believing in the so-called teachings of Jesus and God. Mass hypocrisy. There is an argument to be made that if the plague did not happen, Christianity would not have gained the power it gained all these centuries.
At the dawn of the 14th century, Western civilization is riding a phenomenal streak of prosperity.
Europe has had 3, maybe 4 centuries of really good times. The church has been strong, various kingdoms have been strong, trade has grown.
As the plague progressed, one senses that all the institutions in medieval society, including most notably the church, were shown to be as, the plague showed them to be as powerless as, they were just like everyone else, as the poorest peasant.
This juggernaut will be hard to stop. The medieval masses are ready for a miracle, and the flagellants seem ready to deliver.
Before the plague, the Catholic Church was very strong, and these Christians, former Catholics, had very little power, and also the Black Madonna and Child were very prominent before the Bubonic Plague. The Black Madonna and Child entered Europe and the world around the 11th or 12th century. So 1,000+ years of the story of Jesus being spread around the world, and this Black Madonna and Child enters Europe and the world? The Black Madonna and Child were around for centuries in Europe and around the world, then all of a sudden the Black Madonna and Child are replaced by a white version in the Middle Ages sometime after Konrad Schmid, and nobody wants to discuss this? I have watched many YouTube videos that discuss the dubious history of Jesus, but none bring up the Black Madonna and Child versus the White Madonna and Child. Like I said, many questions. Christianity is a perversion of Catholicism, hence the White Madonna and Child. Sometime after Konrad Schmid, the white version was introduced into Europe and around the world. Konrad was not only a self-proclaimed leader of the flagellants in Thuringia, Germany, he proclaimed himself king of Thuringia. Sound familiar? Him and his followers appointed him king. Not only that, he was executed in 1368 by a Pontius Pilate type figure named Walter Kurlinger, a 14th-century inquisitor. After his death, do you know what his followers believed? Go on, guess. They believed he would rise from the dead as a divine being and be emperor of the last days, which was 1369 according to Konrad. The goalpost was obviously moved. Many individuals were attached to this medieval prophecy about resurrection, but not as much Christian fervor than around the time of Konrad Schmid. Supposedly the story of Jesus has spread far and wide by then, so how is it that not only is the Black Madonna and Child all throughout Europe and the world in the 14th century, but these devoted flagellant Christian zealots believed Konrad Schmid was going to rise up from the dead as a divine being and emperor of the last days, and not this Jesus character? Because so-called Jesus didn't exist at that time. In the 1360s, these devout Christians should be aware of so-called Jesus, but they were not, because he didn't exist until then. At some point they obviously changed his name to Jesus. The so-called Emperor Constantine is a medieval pope. The Black Madonna and Child were pushed aside for a white version, effectively rewriting history. The virgin birth and rising from the dead claims were always sketchy, but it turns out the timeline of so-called Jesus is all wrong. Even if you still believe in the Jesus narrative, the Black Madonna and Child are still a huge part of European, world and African history. Focus on them and ask questions. I am not surprised people and scholars love to avoid talking about them in depth because they will be forced to rewrite history. Always do your own research. Like, share, subscribe, make a comment, and have a blessed day. Thanks for watching.